Everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia, and welcome to everybody. So we usually do either a chapter in the big book, a step from the AA 12 and 12, or a topic. And because we're not affiliated or any other group, we can veer off and refer to outside literature and things like that. So, but we don't go too far off the reservation. So just because resentment is such a hot topic, and so many of us, myself included, sometimes have to really work hard to get through resentments, I wanted to do a talk on resentments and, just some things that might be helpful. So remember, on page 66 of the big book, it tells us resentments are fatal, that they lead to our demise because they cut us off from the sunlight of the spirit. So it's like if we can imagine a plant being cut off from the sunlight, it would die. And also us. The beginning of last week, I had a really strong resentment, and I'm like, I have to pray because, and I've read the thing in the big book, right? Page, I think 522, where if you resent someone, you pray for them every day for 2 weeks. Even if you don't mean it, you pray it anyway, and it will be lifted. And I've had that experience. And this time I thought, yeah, it's not going to get lifted. So day one, nothing happened. Day two, I prayed, and I remembered the line in the book that for us, or for alcoholics, resentments are poison. And I just was thinking, as long as I have this resentment, it is like I have poison in me. So I prayed, and before I got to work that day, the resentment was just gone. I believe that when we work this program and really work on it, like God just melts the resentments. So I'm going to go through some things in the big book, and then I'm going to go through some other things. I just figured I'd give some. We're doing some alliteration here, random remarks on resolving resentment and really entering into the state of forgiveness. So what do we as addicts do? So I've listed 10 points that I've kind of mashed together, mainly from the big book and a book called The Way to Power and Poise by E. Stanley Jones, whose work was studied by the founders of AA and clearly incorporated into the big book. So number one, we look at why we're angry. So we all do the check marks as to what's affected, and it's generally the easiest column to fill out, right? We just make our check marks. But it deserves some thought, because really the basis of most resentments, according to E. Stanley Jones, is a touchy, unsurrendered self. The fact that we have a resentment shows that there's a self that's oversensitive. Why? Because my will has not been fully surrendered to the will of God. When surrendered to the will of God, we throw off resentments the way healthy skin throws off disease germs. Unless there's a cut in the skin, the disease germs just don't get in. So I started thinking about this, like about our third column in our resentments, the things that are affected. And I thought about self-esteem. Well, if something affects my self-esteem, then I haven't surrendered to God the demand that others think about me in a certain way. If I had truly surrendered it, it wouldn't bother me so much what other people said about me. Ambitions. If I truly surrendered my career to God, for example, it wouldn't matter so much if my boss got angry at me, if I didn't get a promotion. I would know, like it says on page 63 of the big book, we had a new employer with a capital E, new employer who provides all I need if, so here's the two conditions to getting all I need from God, if I stay close to him and perform his work well. I had an example where I was working in a law firm, and there were some values in the firm that I didn't really agree with. So I figured I had to leave. So I went to work for the county, and I got a $15,000 a year pay cut, but I just figured I had to do it. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be tight. Well, just at that time, it just so happened that my parents decided, as part of their estate plan, to gift me $18,000 a year. So again, I stayed close to him, performed God's work well. Would my parents have given me the money anyway? I don't know, but I do know that when I try and stay close to God and do what he wants me to do, life just works out better. And remember, step 4, where we are resolving resentments, always comes after step 3. I have the courage to do this often painful moral inventory because by this point, I believe in a God who loves me, who's powerful, and who cares about me. By this point, I know that God's got my back. And it's the same with my personal and sex relations and security. Basically, if something or someone threatens them, I look to see where I haven't fully surrendered my right to something. Now, I qualify this by saying an unsurrendered self, a totally unsurrendered self, is the basis of most resentments. But let's be clear, if someone has violence committed against her, I would never tell her that if she resented her attacker, that her problem was lack of surrender. So this is a general principle, but obviously we don't beat people over the head of it with it who are true victims. Number 2, to realize that the other person is perhaps spiritually sick. I happen to think that this line is one of the most misused lines in the big book, right? I could label Mother Teresa as spiritually sick if she said something I didn't like. It's very easy to get up on a hilltop and look down on these poor spiritually sick people and say, my part is not realizing they're spiritually sick. Sometimes that's true. Um, but I think we have to be careful. Though what we can do is look at the times when someone maybe isn't as spiritually developed as I would like. It's always helpful to look at their story, their upbringing. For example, when I was a kid, my dad yelled a lot and he worked a crazy amount of hours. But if I dug really deep and walk a mile in his moccasins, as they say, I realized my dad was physically abused by his own father. He didn't physically abuse us. And his father was an alcoholic who didn't always have a job. So my dad worked 2 jobs to take care of his family, and he yelled. Major progress over how he was brought up. And in God's eyes, my dad might actually be a saint. So it's helpful to remember that there's a little bit of good in the worst of us and a little bit of bad in the best of us. And here's a prayer I found that I liked. Lord, this person is an infinitely precious child of yours and a spiritually developing person with flaws, just like me. Please help me to relate to them with both of these truths in mind so that I can always love, always forgive, and when necessary, set appropriate boundaries. Also, since we're talking about realizing the other person is perhaps spiritually sick or perhaps spiritually developing, I just want to say that forgiveness does not mean that I have to be in a relationship with someone who is so spiritually sick that they're abusive. If someone is abusive to me, I need to forgive them on the basis that they're spiritually sick, but I don't need to be in relationship. Number 3, we don't stop with just saying that the other person is spiritually sick. We resolutely look for our part in the resentment, and our part is never just, this is a spiritually sick person I need to pray for. In fact, I was once advised to replace the term spiritually sick with either spiritually developing or human, just like me. Otherwise, it's too easy for me to get on a spiritual hilltop and say, I'll just pray for that poor spiritually sick person. But I have to see my part. If someone was nasty to me, was I nasty to them first? If one of my kids is undisciplined, is my part that I was selfish and lazy in teaching them the right things? If I'm angry at how other people are acting, is my part that I think I have a right to control how others think, what they do, or what their values are? I think during the past election here, probably a lot of us got resentful at people of another party. And then we think like, well, what's my part? My part is I think everyone should have my values. No one needs to have my same values for me to be happy. So I have to realize that. And that's the same kind of thing if, I don't know, let's say our cousin invites Uncle Ed to the wedding. No, and she knows we can't stand Uncle Ed. Our cousin can invite whoever she wants, do whatever she wants. Um, Sometimes my part is I think I'm entitled to fill in the blank. So for instance, if I have a health problem and I think, oh, not fair, and I resent that I have whatever I have. Well, my part is I think I'm entitled to perfect health. I think I'm entitled to a long life. I think I'm entitled to, it never storming when I have a doctor's appointment and storming so bad I have to cancel it. Um, Entitlement is a big part of where I'm wrong a lot. Other ways I'm wrong a lot sometimes is being a peace faker. So that would occur. I'm just making up an example now. So let's say my husband kept the air conditioning too cold. It used to be that actually used to be a problem until I became a certain age, and now I am always too warm. But if let's say I had a resentment that my husband kept the house too cold, but I never told him. Why? Because I'm being a peace faker. My part is often I don't want to have hard conversations. I want to pretend that everything's okay when it isn't okay. Peace faking. So that, and the third thing I just thought of is righteous indignation. So I could get mad at, let's say human traffickers, right? Like anyone could get mad at that. But, in the big book, it says righteous indignation is a dubious luxury of normal people. For us, it's poison. So, what do I do now? I actually, when I do my morning prayers, I pray that God does a work in the hearts of traffickers and changes their hearts. And I don't sit there and feel angry. I pray and I give money to causes that fight against human trafficking. So really, if I have a resentment, I always have a part. Sometimes it might be because other people are thinking or talking badly about me. My part may be I made what other people say or think about me my business, and it's none of my business. So many of my resentments go away when I realize that the thing is not my business. And I look at it kind of like, those laps where you swim that have the ropes that divide you so you don't go into other swimmers. I kind of think of it like that, like I'm swimming toward God, right? We go through the steps and we're working toward an enhanced relationship with God, knowledge of his will for us, power to carry it out. Well, if I swim into someone else's lane that's, their business, I'm keeping my eyes off where it's supposed to be. And if I let other people crowd into my lane and take on problems that shouldn't be mine, I'm also taking my eyes off God. So again, whenever we're resentful, I find it helpful to think, is this thing really any of my business? Am I being a peace faker? Am I feeling like I'm entitled to something? Number four, we have to make up our minds that in this world, we are not going to escape injustice and pain. The big book talks about certain trials and low spots, certain, not maybe, and tells us what to do when, not if, trouble comes. Big Book doesn't say we will never have troubles. So if we believe that because we've given our life to God, our lives going forward will be pain-free, we will be guilty of our old enemy, unfair expectations. And that's often when we get mad at God, right? We say, God, I've surrendered my life to you. Why are you allowing this to happen to me? And, I think when we do that, we're really unfair to God. Like, so let's say I have a health problem, and it's like, if I were to say, God, this is really unfair, God could very well come back to me and say, you know what else is unfair, Janet? You have your eyesight. You're not deaf, you're not crippled, you have a house, you have a family, you have a job. That's really not fair. You have more than 90%, 95% of this world. You're right, I'm not fair. I've given you too much, right? God could say that to me. We have to think, could God say that to us? Are we unfair to God? So let's see. The big book tells us that when trouble comes, what do? We cheerfully capitalize on them as a chance for God to show his omnipotence. That means we continue to do the right thing, we trust God, and we wait for the miracles. And I remember one time, so my daughter was in college and she was home on break, and she was going to go see her old boyfriend, who was a person I didn't really want her to see. He wasn't my favorite person. And I just thought, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to say a word. And then she ended up like not seeing him, go hanging out with her best friend. And now she's got like this really nice boyfriend, and they went ring shopping last week. Now, did keeping my mouth shut result in that? I mean, probably not. But I do believe that when I try to take matters into my hands, I tie God's hands. Number 5, we can pray for those who harm us. E. Stanley Jones says, by praying for those who wrong us, the resentment is sterilized by the antiseptic of prayer. He advises to pray first as soon as we feel the first tinge of a resentment. And this makes sense. Remember, if we try to do an inventory without bringing God into it, it's just psychology. So the freedom from bondage prayer is on page 552 of the big book. And I have to tell you, there are times when I have felt this resentment will never go away. And 100% of the time, when I committed to praying this prayer every day for 2 weeks and do it, it never even took 2 weeks. It went away. Number 6, we can go beyond prayer. The big book says we ask God to show us how we can be helpful to the person who has hurt us. We can do good to those who hurt us. Can we bring in the garbage cans of the neighbor we hate? When my son was in high school, and by the way, he's graduating from college this weekend, but when he was in high school, he was very difficult. And I remember one time he was just he was so difficult. And I was going out to get myself a latte. And I said to him, can I bring you back a latte? It's killing me, but I did it. And he said, sure. And, started breaking down the walls. The best example I can think of, there was a movie called End of the Spear, and there were some missionaries in South America, and they went to a tribe of people, and they all got killed. Every single missionary got killed. Um, and their wives then went back to the people who had killed their husbands when they all had polio and ministered to them. I don't know if I could do that, but I like reading about those examples of forgiveness, and it's something to aspire to. And remember in the chapter, The Family Afterwards, page 127, it says we can help another person's crankiness disappear if we show love and spiritual understanding. So that means if someone around me is cranky, instead of me getting angry, I show love and spiritual understanding. Number 7, we can forgive because God has forgiven us. We can think about what God has done for us. We can think of the 1,000 times a day God manifests his love and faithfulness to us. And as we think of his love for us, a feeling of humble gratitude can spring up within us. As we experience gratitude to God for all he's done in our lives, we'll realize that the people around us just need to be treated with love and patience, just like God has treated us, even when I'll speak for myself, even when I didn't deserve it. And since God has been so patient with me, how do I have a right to be so critical and impatient toward others? God has patiently led us, as we go through these steps to a deeper understanding of truth. He's waited for us, not just waited, launched search and rescue missions for us, waited for our lagging understanding and our faltering faith to catch up. How will we respond to others whose understanding and faith are a bit behind ours? There's a saying I hear, I'm just another bozo on the bus. I hate that saying. I'm not a bozo. I'm a beloved child of God. But if I'm recovered and there's someone who isn't, I do believe there's a bus. And maybe I just got on one stop ahead of the next person. That's it. Doesn't make me any better. We all need to get on the bus. What we are not to do. So the big book cautions me against harboring resentments. I always think that's such an interesting word, harbor. It reminds me like of a place where a ship can be safe in a storm. Well, how do I make myself a safe harbor for resentments so that anger and hatred actually feel comfortable living in me? Well, here's what I'm not to do if I don't want to become a harbor. I'm not to review these resentments over and over in my mind or review them over and over with others under the guise of getting help or asking people to pray for the other person. When what I'm really trying to do is get people to agree with my perception that that other person is a creep. That's building a harbor. The best thing is to tell one person, and ideally someone who doesn't know the person we resent. I usually tell Melissa my resentments, but often if it's someone she knows, I'll go to someone else instead. My sponsor, who doesn't go to the meetings I go to or travel in the same circles. We have to be careful, right? Sometimes we call someone before we do a resentment inventory, saying we just need to vent. But one of my favorite spiritual authors says, if we're angry with someone, we don't need to vent, we need to repent. So before we call each other about our lousy husbands or our creepy bosses or our ridiculous kids, we should do our resentment inventories. Number 9, we avoid retaliation and argument. The big book makes it clear that avoiding retaliation is an essential ingredient in the cocktail of forgiveness. When someone wrongs us, there is an absolutely unavoidable sense that the person owes us, like they've incurred a debt. And we want to make that other person pay that debt. We do it by hurting them back, by yelling at them, by talking about them behind their back, by making them feel bad in some way, or just taking the martyr's way out and waiting and watching and hoping that something bad will happen to them. Only after we see them suffer in some way do we sense that the debt has been paid. So what's forgiveness? Forgiveness means giving up the right to seek repayment from the one who harmed us. Forgiveness means we give up the right to revenge, either here or in the hereafter. So I had some resentments against my dad, and I did the inventories. I was very nice to him. I didn't, cut him out of my life or anything. I loved it, but I couldn't get over the resentment. And I realized that I was waiting for when he died, God was going to kind of show him a movie of his life of everything wrong that he had done to me and that he would feel guilty. Basically, God was going to get revenge on my behalf. And when I realized it, I said a prayer. I said, God, when my father dies, anything he did wrong, don't hold it against him when you judge him. I gave up the right to like cosmic revenge. And it took my emotions a while to catch up. And I have to tell you, and this is really the truth, now my dad's been dead a number of years now. Now, when I think of him, I only think of the good things, like me parallel parking into a tight spot in New York City and him saying, come on, Janet, you can do it. Or how good he was with my kids and loved my kids. And the only times I ever remember any of the bad stuff is if I can use it to help another person. Otherwise, it's like once I gave that to God, God just like took Windex to my memories and cleaned away all the bad ones. Number 10, we ask God to help us show the other person the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. That means that we don't express ourselves or vent to the person in order to feel better. There's a story of a woman who was very angry at her husband who said, I think I'd be well if I could just once tell my husband to go to hell. The response, perhaps she would have been relieved momentarily, but the resentments would fill up again and be ready for another spillover. Expression is not the remedy. It's merely dealing with a symptom instead of the disease. So what does it mean to have tolerance, pity, and patience? I love how Melissa always defines tolerance. My own threshold to withstand pain or sorrow is raised. It means I stop being so easily offended, so hypersensitive. And pity um, is defined as the feeling of sorrow and compassion at the suffering and misfortune of others. What would it look like to have compassion on others, right? It means to really care, to look at things from their point of view, and to not be so hypersensitive, to not take everything so seriously. And then I want to say a couple things about forgiving ourselves. People often ask, should I put myself on a resentment inventory? Big Book doesn't talk about it. Um, Here's my opinion. No, we don't put ourselves on a resentment inventory. First, it's really awkward. So let's say I resent myself because I'm a compulsive eater. What does it affect? Okay, it affects my self-esteem. What's my part? I'm a compulsive eater. It's just like it goes about in circles. It doesn't really work. So I found a better way that if I resent myself, it's because I have likely done something wrong. So I just inventory what I've done wrong. I was mean to this person, right? Why do we resent ourselves? Because we don't act according to our own ideal of what a good person should act like. So I just say, I was prejudiced, I was mean, and I resolve it kind of on a character defect level. God, I had prejudice against this person. Please remove my prejudice. And I make amends if I need to. Um, we ask God to remove our defects, we make our amends, and then we are forgiven. Now, many people say they have more trouble forgiving themselves than they do accepting God's forgiveness. But what really lies behind this idea of I can't forgive myself? So, again, one of the spiritual writers I follow says, when people say I can't forgive myself, it's really an indication of pride because we're in essence saying our judgment is more accurate than God's. When we say, I know God has forgiven me, but I just can't forgive myself, we're acting as if our own judgment holds more weight than God's. And the big book is really clear, right? Anytime we're sorry for what we've done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven. So I want to leave some time at the end. If anyone has a resentment they're struggling with and want some help with, that try and help out. If you want it to be anonymous, you can text it to Melissa in the chat and she'll ask it for you. But whenever I talk about resolving resentments and forgiveness, I always like to close with this story by Corrie ten Boom. And you may have heard it before. I've I've heard it and I've read it multiple times and it always gets me. And it always gets me also and that I first to see what an incredible human being she was with God's help. And it shows me how far I have to go. So this is her story. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door at the rear. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. It was the truth they needed most to hear in that bitter, bombed out land, and I gave them my favorite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from a Hollander's mind, I like to think that that's where forgiven sins were thrown. When we confess our sins, I had said, God casts them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence collected their coats, in silence left the room. And that's when I saw him working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat, the next a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. And now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fraulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take that hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among those thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crops swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard in there. No, he didn't remember me. But since that time, he went on, I've become a Christian. I know God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fraulein. Again, the hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there, I whose sins had every day had to be forgiven, and I could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you don't forgive people for injuring you, neither will God forgive you. I knew it not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies were able also to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. God help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God, so I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. And with that, I will pass.